And that's where we're keeping our focus this morning, the supplementary elections ahead of them. Let's quickly go to Abuja with Malkwe.
Well, thank you, Gimba. We have with us in the studio this morning Mr. Sowunmi, who is a spokesperson of the Presidential Campaign Council of the People's Democratic Party. We're going to be taking a look at the 2019 elections and, of course, looking ahead to the supplementary elections as well. Mr. Sowunmi, thank you for coming on Sunrise Daily.
Thank you for having me, Malkwe.
Well, it's been a while, and one would have thought that by now we would have calmed down, look at what happened during the 2019 elections, and perhaps maybe devise other strategies. I don't know how involved you are with the governorship elections, and perhaps you're possibly looking at some of the supplementary elections still to take place in some states, especially as winners are yet to be declared, and maybe re-strategize. But tell us, how would you say the 2019 elections went?
I think that because the country is big and it's difficult for people to stand in one location and see exactly what has happened all over the country, people don't exactly internalize the element of fraud that we call an election. Look, the preparation towards the 2019 election was very thorough. INEC kept keeping everybody on their toes as to this was going to happen, this is what the guideline says, this is when you can campaign and all that. They got the monies they wanted, and lo and behold, the first telltale sign that we were in for a very rough ride was the cancellation a couple of hours before they started the election. Okay, as if 1 week was not enough for them to get their act together, we proceeded to witness what is shameful.
Just before you go on to the 23rd, when the elections eventually held, the elections that were postponed, from what we gathered, and this is word on the street, words from behind the scenes, we heard that even within parties, it seemed that there was some, gratitude that happened. Some people said, oh, that it scattered the plans of quite a number of people who had planned something terrible and things of the sort, and
the kind of damage
it exposed those kinds of plans, and as such, people were better prepared for the following week. How true was that?
The kind of damage control narrative that upset, that's one of them. We're not...
It wasn't true.
We're not... Totally false. We're not the most complicated nation in the world in terms of election logistics. Malaysia is more complicated. Indonesia is more complicated. They have small islands and they have to organize election. They're going to do another one in April. You and I are going to be the judge when it happens, whether they made a mess of themselves in the Committee of Nations and before the world. There was no excuse for that. Election is not a one-day event. Election is a series of logistics events that stems from even before you even get to become candidate. So all of that is rubbish. It's lack of planning. It's a contrived effort to give an undue advantage to those that are in charge of the country now. And obviously it played out when they finally got to the day of the election. You cannot tell me that as a Nigerian, you are happy to see the kind of suppression, the kind of orgy of violence, the kind of bloodletting, almost destroying the fiber that kept us together. When people live in Lagos, in Okota and such areas, and they've lived and done businesses they have contributed, the Igbos I'm talking about, and the non-indigenous, and suddenly they have to exercise their right of franchise, and you can see the level of brigandage that was let loose there by who? The level of voter buying and financial inducement. There are those that you say, okay, maybe they'll find out on the field. What about the ones where you sit there on your TV and you're watching 2 billion van go into the house of Bola Tinubu, leader of the opposition, and nobody is talking about it? Look, we have rarely begun to suffer what you call the Stockholm syndrome, where the whole of society begins to pretend.
When you say no one talked about it, I mean, you heard, I think...
No, I wasn't talking about the journalists. I was talking about the EFCC and those who are supposed to go and ask, what is bullion vans doing in people's houses? That's what we have become. Now, back to the substantial issue of what are our grounds with the election. As far as we are concerned, the election was just a major fraudulent heist where people try to adjust and write figures for themselves and give themselves numbers. Unfortunately, they are not even clever at it. When you see that the numbers don't add up, you have a couple of rules that make you determine one place as inconclusive, which according to their own nonsense means that the number of cancelled votes were more than the margin. What about the presidential election? Was that not exactly the same thing that transpired? You put out your election guidelines. You say people must do accreditation by the machine and the accreditation must count, and you come and bring us all of those jargons. Look, one of the reasons why we complain and why we talk is not so much because we want to be pitied. No. We talk and we complain and we go to court so that we can correct the system, either from the back end of the judiciary or from the consciousness of the entire society, where we can then say to ourselves, no, the business of election is to allow people in a democracy to pick who they want, and they must do so underneath the most civil atmosphere, bearing one. Look, you got what is, look at Port Harcourt. Can you be an indigene of Nigeria, either from Port Harcourt or not being from Port Harcourt, and you just watch the level of brigandage going on there, and you wouldn't ask yourself, to what end and what purpose? If the intention is to serve the people, why do you want to kill them? Okay, if you want to kill the people, are there no consequences for murder? Look, we have allowed...
But some people will say Port Harcourt, a river state,
yes,
is an exception, not the rule. I mean,
it's not an exception.
It cannot be taken as what transpired in all around the country.
Perhaps because His Excellency Senate President Bukola Saraki seems to be someone who bears his issues with dignity. That's why people don't know that the whole of the joke that took place in Kwara was an over-militarization and over-hounding of the process. And perhaps because he was clever enough to let his people just allow it slide, and you didn't get a breakdown of madness there. That's why people are thinking that that's not what happened everywhere. Perhaps because you have not really gone to look at what happened in Taraba. Perhaps you have not looked at Nasarawa. Perhaps you don't have the benefits of some of the information that some of us have. Because in preparing our petition to go to court, we're going to have to call in all our agents. We're going to have to subpoena INEC. We're going to ask to say we want to look at the books. And you know what we found? We are praying to God that, having laid our petition, the petition of His Excellency Atiku Abubakar just yesterday, we're praying to God that this trial will open the eyes of all Nigerians so that they can see just how low we have fallen. Look, what does it matter? You can only serve people for a term, maybe 4 years, if you're lucky 8. But there are bigger issues there. The bigger issue is that we must recognize that institutional reforms is the only thing that has got us stability from all ages. And therefore, I always like to go with a quote. I have seen the future. It's very bright. And it is hinged on institutional reform.
You have alleged fraud. In fact, you've termed the entire process, the entire electoral process, fraudulent, if I get you
totally unacceptable fraudulent.
This fraud, some people say it happened on both sides. They say that some of the figures are recorded even in areas which were traditionally or known as the strongholds of the PDP.
I think that
if those figures are interrogated, the chances are high that you might not be saints either.
I think that if that narrative wishes to tell us as Nigerians that this is the best we can do for ourselves, we call it fraud, and it is fraud. It's for the panel to look at it and say, oh, substantial non-compliance has taken place, we can correct it and declare Atiku winner, or, oh, really, we didn't even know it was up to this level and we will annul the entire process. You know why? Because it goes down to the fundamentals of why we are in a democracy in the first instance. Democracy is not pretty. Democracy is costly. Democracy leaves a lot of taste in the mouth of people who feel the whole of the energy that goes into it. It's made worse when people are now going to be sitting in government in an illegitimate manner or be preparing to enthrone themselves illegitimately on the people. Where then do they get the moral rectitude to be able to hold authority over them? So going to court is actually in the best interest of all of us. Because look at it. The country for the first time has become united along two lines. United across board because two people of the same basic ethnic groups were on the ballot. It wasn't religion anymore. It probably was a clash of the classes. But all of this showed that you can see a trace across the entire country that we now have two hands that is running our nation. And if fraud has taken place, if people have issues with it, if it doesn't even meet our own standard, then we cannot say the excuse is, oh, you are a little thief here, there's a big thief here. Because of that, let us just say thief cancel thief. Who does that? We are in a nation that is part of a committee of other nations. We must continually do peer review with ourselves. We must hold ourselves to higher ideals. You know why? Because time is going to rub off of those men who can still get away with it. What happens when the younger generation, who probably will be more restive, who probably will be more angry, who probably will want to break up the country, what happens if they don't have faith in the institution? So whatever we need to do, we must look at it well. We must put it before a panel. We know a lot of nonsense has taken place there. They didn't even add the figures well. They didn't even stay consistent. And at the end of the day, our prayer is that, 2, will be declared, 3, or in the alternative, be annulled. I'm even adding a third one. The third one is that at least society can see precisely what kind of joke we have become. So that when somebody says, stand up for the president, sensible members of society can say, no, he ain't president. He is an interloper who has taken the powers of the people and he has made them prostrate until they are not able to do nothing. But you know what? Good people stand right when there is the need for society to move forward.
I'm going to, I'm going to have to ask you to, to temper your words. Reason being that, as we know it today, until proven otherwise, until you have the evidence in a tribunal, which you have eventually gone to,
yes, the
president is not just the president, he's also the president-elect. And this is according to an electoral process that has gone on. You allege that it is a fraud, but for the people who voted for him and who believe he actually won, he is the president. Let
me put it to you this way. He's my president up until May 29, because the first presidency he got is legitimate because Jonathan conceded. We will then begin to query whether he is president if we now go to the tribunal and say, okay, pending when the tribunal finishes, I'm going to be calling him president with a bit of a pinch of salt. And it's like asking me not to cry after you have beaten me. I think it would be unfair to me. I think it would be fair to our supporters. I think it would even be unfair to those who have lost their life if you now ask
by all means cry. By all means
I
cry.
cannot wear him.
I'm going to ask you to cry with some decorum. That's what I'm asking you to do.
I'm crying with as much decorum as I can. I cannot wear him. I cannot wear him a garland of honor when in the real sense of the word is supposed to be.
It is important to state at this point that we